Welcome to the WIN Coalition's What's Next Speaker Series, where we bring together thought leaders, innovators, and experts to explore the future of education and beyond. Our conversations are designed to inspire new ideas, spark curiosity, and provide practical insights for educators, students, and lifelong learners alike. Thank you for joining us today on this journey into what's next. Now, let's dive into today's discussion.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of our podcast, the WIN Speaker Series. It's sponsored by the WIN Coalition. We here at Yavapai College, it's a community of practice where we keep our eye on the horizon for what is next in our college, in our communities, and in our world. I'm Robin Bryce, Special Programs Manager here at Yavapai College, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. And we are joined by two wonderful people here at Yavapai College, Megan Crossfield and Carolyn Meekins-Farnsworth. I will let them introduce themselves in a moment. And we are super excited to have David Harris here, who is the editor-in-chief of OpenStax. Thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to explore the future of education and OER and technology and all things nerdy. So without further ado, I want to welcome everyone to the WIN Speaker Series. And now I'm going to pass it over to our hosts. Take it away.
Thank you, Robin and the WIN Coalition for hosting us. So excited to be here. My name is Megan Crossfield. I'm the Manager of Academic Initiatives. In addition, I am also the Board President for the OER Arizona Network and love anything that has to do with OER and open education. So very excited to have David here today. Carrie?
Hi, my name is Carrie Meekins-Farnsworth, and I am the OER librarian here at Yavapai College. And I originally came from a K-12 public school setting, so open education has always been very important in making sure that everyone has equal access. And I'm really, really excited to meet with David today. Before we begin, I'm going to give a quick little bio about David and tell everybody a little bit about him. David Harris is the editor-in-chief of OpenStax, a nonprofit educational institution at Rice University, and is dedicated to improving student access to quality learning resources. Under his leadership, OpenStax has expanded its library to over 30 textbooks covering a wide range of subjects and discipline. These textbooks are peer-reviewed, openly licensed, and freely available in digital formats, with low-cost print editions also offered. Before joining OpenStax, Harris served as president of WebAssign, an independent online homework provider specializing in STEM education. And Harris is a vocal advocate for academic integrity and has addressed challenges posed by emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence in the educational landscape. He emphasizes the importance of authentic assessment and the role of OER in promoting equity and access in education. So welcome, David. We are so excited to have you here with us.
Well, I'm thrilled to be with you, and I really appreciate all the work that you are doing in regards to building awareness around OER and the critical issues of academic integrity and artificial intelligence.
Okay, so not everyone that's going to be listening to this recording is going to be familiar with OpenStax and OER. So for those unfamiliar, can you share a little bit about OpenStax and how it impacts students and educators?
Absolutely. So OpenStax was founded by Rich Baranek, professor of engineering at Rice University 25 years ago. It was called Connections at the time. It became OpenStax in 2011. That's when I joined OpenStax. And our goal was very simple. It was really around access. At that time, the cost of resources for students was prohibitive. There were too many students making difficult choices between feeding their families or buying the requisite course material. So we wanted to produce high-quality open education resources that are professionally produced, meet the scope and sequence requirement, and are completely free for students. And we started with one textbook in 2012, College Physics. We now actually have over 60 resources, and it now serves over 7 million students a year. And that is what we call formal students in assigned courses. There are millions more of independent learners who access our resources. And I think the growth of it is really thanks to the support of the community.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, go on, Carrie.
Recently, we all got to watch a presentation that you did, and where you talked about this post. I'm having a hard time saying that word. Post dissemination. There we go. In the post-secondary market. So, can you share a little bit what you were talking about with that?
Yeah, I was talking about the disintermediation in the secondary market. And this is a new concept for many of us who come from, let's call it the pre-COVID era and maybe the pre-asynchronous learning era. The way the market used to operate is you'd have a professor in a course. They make all of the course decisions, and they were excellent at this because had great eye for quality. They would assign those resources to students, and then the students could go and work through the course. It worked that way for many, many years. Then what happened really in the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years, or was accelerated, is what we call disintermediation. This is when other entities came into the market. I will name names like Chegg, Course Hero, Photomath. We can go on, in which the students go and use those materials, but the faculty are not always aware of it. And unfortunately, what's happened is these resources are used to take shortcuts. If you go and visit their websites, they'll say, we'll get you a homework answer in as quick as 30 seconds, or we'll help you write the essay. And so it's short-circuiting the learning process. And the reality is that many faculty don't have control over that. So disintermediation has not been a good thing for academic integrity. And it's now a fundamental feature, if you will, of the market that those of us who care about education and those of us that support OER need to think seriously about as we map out our future.
Wonderful. As a follow-up for that, that's kind of one of the things I'm curious about. What is OpenStax doing to sort of ensure that quality and academic integrity, and also communicating with faculty, librarians who are finding resources like this is why we're vetted. What are some of the things you're doing over at OpenStax?
Great question. So on the quality side, we've always followed a peer-reviewed model. Where we work with subject matter experts, the authors, to develop the resources, and then we extensively peer review them. All of the materials are originally sourced, and we have never used, and we don't have planning on using AI to develop core resources for texts. Your question about academic integrity is a tricky one because a producer of resources doesn't really have much control over the student behavior, over how the faculty communicate academic integrity to students, but we can play a role. Several things we've done. The first of all is in every book now, we have we call it an academic integrity slider, where faculty can make choices about what is acceptable and non-acceptable behavior for students. Let's use AI as an example. For some faculty, that is an acceptable behavior. They're building resources in which they expect the students to use the AI. So we would put that probably in the green column. For other faculty, they think if they're going to go to AI just to get the homework solution, that's unacceptable. So what we're doing in the case of the academic integrity slider, we're giving agency to faculty to communicate to students what is acceptable and not acceptable, because many students don't know. All they're getting is a blizzard of information from the intermediary incumbents, if you will, telling them that it's cool to take shortcuts. And so we want to alter that programming message. Secondly, we've been hard at work on looking at our assessments. The reality is if you use an assessment today that you used last year, the only thing you're assessing is the student's ability to get the answer from some type of AI source. So we're looking at ways to change our assessments. in our LMS cartridges and our assignable platform, we are embedding a lot more group type of activities that make it more difficult to just game the system, if you will. So these are small measures that we're taking, but there's a long way to go in this regard. But it's not going to be just OpenStax. It's going to take community effort.
So I love how you're talking about how we're engaging students differently in the classroom and trying to teach them, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable in using these tools. And so when you're talking about these assessments, that's a lot more open-ended type of questions. And how can and that's a lot more work on the faculty to grading these papers or these different types of assessments now versus having more of these multiple choice type of questions that we've seen in the past. Those questions are now, they're available for students. So what do you see for faculty moving forward in engaging students, but also making sure they have time to give appropriate feedback?
So Megan, you're getting at the crux of the challenge. When you introduce change into a system, it's always met with resistance. I don't care what system that is. We work in the academic sector. And so there are barriers to driving change. And the more change you introduce, the more resistance there is, and the more difficult it is to scale. I think OpenStax was very successful at scaling because we made it very easy to adopt our materials. They were very, very familiar. We're at a different moment now, and so it is going to probably require some change in practice. As you said, there's an irony here that we're adding all this technology in, but we might have to go back to some form of more manual grading, and that it adds more burden on faculty. So when we think about that, the question is, how can we ease into this? So I don't think you can move to these types of group activity, open-ended exercises wholesale. That's too much work. But can you use it in a spot check way? Can you occasionally use it just to at least get an assessment of what the student's baseline knowledge is, other than just being able to go to ChatGPT or one of those sites? So we're working on some of those type activities. Secondly, as I understand it, the AI technology is evolving fast enough that within a year or two, you'll be able to create one of these activities, work with your AI agent to come up with a rubric to grade it, and then you can actually use AI to help grade it. Now, I think that's still going to take manual intervention, but there's some hope that for these much more rigorous, thought-provoking, less straight-up answer type evaluations, technology might be able to help in grading that.
Wonderful. So kind of coming back to OpenStax as being an open educational resource, what are how do you see the future of OER, and as things have been progressing, even more of the open education broadly? Where do you see the future of that in the next decade?
Great question. So I'm more optimistic than ever for several reasons. First, if you look at the latest data on OER awareness and usage from Bayview Analytics, it's really nearly at an all-time high, which is great because that means that we've finally reached a point where I think the community is thinking, oh, is there an OER resource first? And then an all rights reserved commercial lockdown resource second. So that gives us tremendous momentum in driving, a greater adoption of OER. Second, if we look at where we're going and how student behaviors are changing in terms of, they may not be using the text as much as they used to, and they're looking for alternative means or alternative types of resources like video, practice, support, homework support. AI is beautifully set up, OER is beautifully set up for that because of its lack of restriction. So we can take and modify and adapt the OER resources in a way that will meet the student current workflow. And we should be very optimistic about that. Is it going to happen automatically? No, we're going to have to be very active agents in that change. But I believe that we can meet the moment and we will see the proliferation of OER usage. I look at it as a 10x opportunity. We always think in terms of individual students in individual courses. But that's actually not the largest fraction of learners. The largest fraction of learners are the independent learners who may not be in a formal course. We can now go and reach them too. So, as I like to say, the revolution's just begun.
And I love how you're talking about how we can reach such a wide audience of learners because they aren't just our traditional learners anymore. What type of tools or how is OER being integrated into some of these tools that can be used as tutors or to better help support our students and our independent learners?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example from OpenStax. So this year, Google Gemini, in collaboration with OpenStax, created an extension, an OpenStax extension. And so the students can go and use, a learner could go in and use that extension, and it's trained on specific OpenStax content, which is critically important because that boosts the reliability of that content. My understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, is that the accuracy of AI is hovers around 80%, which is pretty good. I mean, it's going through a lot of information, but it's not good enough for education. I don't want a nurse who's got 80% knowledge myself. And so we need to be much more demanding and training it on authoritative content. And so I think that's an example of where OER could be deployed. And there's other examples out there. There's a group in Canada, which I recommend people to look at. It's called AI Tutor Pro, which is funded by the government of Ontario. And they have trained their AI agents on OER and OpenStax resources. So it's much more course specific. In that instance, if you're a professor, you can also upload your course notes and it will be trained on that and it will query the students about it. So now we're getting to much more locally contextualized resources for students, which I think will add the relevancy and effectiveness for them.
How do you see OER and open pedagogy impacting academic integrity?
Right. So, we touched on this earlier. I think let's look at it from OER from a very broad perspective, not just an OpenStax perspective. And if when we think about academic integrity now, we also have to think about the impacts of AI. So a lot of faculty today are struggling with how do I change my course or change my assignments to meet this moment so that students still have a learning experience. We still have to promote, I think, what we would call productive struggle. Our goal here with students, and we can clearly communicate to them, is we want to improve their return on effort. If you go and put an hour of effort in today, we want that to be more effective than it was 5 years ago. That's our goal, not to take shortcuts. So where OER can be really effective is creating these types of assignments, creating these types of assessments, maybe working with open AI, not Open AI, the company, but Open AI providers to make the AI more responsible in education. But I do think the first step would be very helpful is to openly license assignments and activities that recognize that the students are using AI. Uh, that would be a huge step forward for OER, and it's going to take an enormous amount of work. You think of how many disciplines there are, and you think about how many topics within those disciplines, and you get to see the enormity of the challenge ahead. But I think the market demands it.
It's funny, something you just said. I'm sorry, I don't know why it made me think about this, but all of a sudden I was thinking of how much AI has, in a sense, created a certain equity. And going just to think it back, like from back in the day when I was in school, that was a big thing about fraternities and sororities, right? You get in
Right.
because they have the test banks, right? You could go into the room that had the library of all the old exams, and you could read through because faculty would maybe choose some questions from this one and from that one, and they would create. And it's sort of like now it's all open to everybody. You don't have to try and pledge in order to get the last year's exams, like what you were talking about. This is
Exactly. This
really opened it up for everybody, but really faculty have been struggling with this forever.
They have, and it's the scale that has changed. A few years, maybe it was 2 years ago, I was speaking to the president of ICAI, the International Center for Academic Integrity, and I think I might have said the same thing, Carrie. This has been going on forever, in terms of holding exams, going to fraternity houses, getting the exams, and she said, uh, David, what's different is the scale now and the availability of it. And so if we look back, I'm paraphrasing here, if we look back 10 years ago, cheating or academic, infringement was done offensively to get an advantage against their peers. Now it's done defensively because if the students know if they don't do it, every student's going to be ahead of them and they won't make the curve. So that's a big shift. And I think we have to work hard to kind of see if we can get that genie a little bit back in the bottle and put it back on the offensive footing rather than the defensive one. Because if it stays defensive and everyone feels they have to do it just to stay ahead, we start rotting the whole system. And that's terrible for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Can I
Oh,
go ahead?
No,
Go ahead.
no.
I have. Oh, I just want to. What I found was really interesting is when you had talked about educators openly licensing their own resources,
Mhm.
and to add to this like pool, so that we have this like integrity in and accuracy in what is being scraped, and create these sources that are more around education, and more of that. Instead of 80%, it's 90%, 100% now, because we have these individuals with this subject matter expert actually creating these sources. But what I want to ask you, and I've had some conversations regarding intellectual property and the people's willingness to let this go. And I think all of us who have probably had conversations around OER and with different people, there's definitely a willingness for people to share, but there's also this is mine and I don't want to share that. And I wanted to know, maybe speak to that, and how can you inspire people to share what they're creating, because they are creating wonderful things, but to add to this pool as we continue to move forward, so we can all move forward together.
Well, this is a great question, and it's a question that started actually when we started OpenStax and tried to recruit authors. The reality, there's several realities. Okay, the first reality is most authors go into creating educational resources not to become rich, but to have a positive impact on students. And that's a good thing, because the vast majority who work on those resources don't become rich. The very top best-selling, under the traditional model, best-selling authors made a great living at it. But that is a very small number. I know that. I used to work at the major publishers. And so then it really becomes a question of impact. Do you want to impact the 30 students that you see annually in your course, or do you want to impact the lives of 60,000 students? And luckily for OER, most people side on the greater impact. I think where it gets difficult for some, and I completely accept this, and it's not right for them, is, and you mentioned that, Robin, that control piece. Because if we openly license resource, we are giving control, we're taking control away from the author and giving it to the user and giving them permission to adapt it. And the original author may not like the way that the adaptation is done, but they have no control over that. So for some authors, that's a bridge too far. Not many, but some. So I think is that control piece, that's a big hurdle. But the inspiration side is, I think of John McMurray, who is an organic chemistry author, the best-selling organic chemistry author of all time. And he used to publish his book by Cengage. And his son passed away from cystic fibrosis in 2019. And he wanted to do something in the memory of his son, because he went through such a medical ordeal. And John's book actually, at one point, was used by a third of medical students in the country. And so he openly licensed his best-selling textbook with OpenStax. And we published it about a year and a half ago. And it's the best-selling, if you will, although we give it away for free, resource we've ever published. And he did that in memory of his son. And I think that really reflects the enormous generosity of the intellectual property of the academic community.
So I wanted to also hear your thoughts, or, we talk about how to encourage or to inspire faculty to share their own work. But what about students? And that brings students into the piece of it. So we talk a lot about faculty, but what if we have students that are publishing their work? And how do we have some faculty that are dabbling in open pedagogical practices and having students license their work. And there are some hesitations even from our students. And so it would be great to hear your thoughts on that.
What a great question. And I have not thought a lot about student publishing their work, to be honest with you. It's not something that I've really focused on. And maybe as a community, we should think more about that. But my instant thought on that is explaining to students how, being a responsible, educated person is giving back your knowledge. And there's no better way of giving back your knowledge than sharing it with other students. That doesn't mean you're giving up your ideas. It doesn't mean actually that you're giving up your intellectual property, because open license doesn't mean that you don't own the original source. You still can. You can copyright it. It just means how you plan to share it with other people. So I think if we can explain it that way, I think I would hope that the students would come along with that. But it's something that I need to think more about. It's a great question.
Yeah, we've had, there's some faculty that are going, they want to create their own OER, but there's nothing there. So they're having to create it from scratch. And so it's almost
Right.
like, well, let's see if we can have our students explain some of these concepts and then compile these resources into maybe a module, or that they can then reuse. And we hear that students learn really well from other students because they explain it in a way that makes sense to them. And so it's just something that we're dabbling into. We have a couple faculty that are working on it, but the question is we need to make sure that we educate our students on what does it mean when you're going to openly license your own resources. And I think it's really interesting how that can also play into academic integrity, because then you're having the students share out its original work, and they will be more likely to share high quality original content if it's going to be openly licensed versus something they get copy pasted from an generative AI.
Exactly. Megan, let's touch for a second on that IP question, because I think it's important, because OER doesn't mean that IP is intellectual property. You're giving up intellectual property. You're not. You still get to retain the copyright. What you're changing is the terms of use. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that openly licensed. They think, oh, it has no copyright. No, that's not the case. And A couple of things we believe strongly, and we do believe in intellectual property. We believe in attribution. This is very important. Actually, one of the problems with AI, I think this is improving somewhat, is the lack of attribution. I mentioned AI Tutor Pro. I think Google's getting better at this, where you can actually find the sources, because that's critical in education. If the students are getting materials and they're claiming it their own, and we know it's not their own, then they should at least know where it's coming from, especially in the age of disinformation. This is probably really critical in the humanities areas.
As we got a couple more minutes, but one of the questions that I have for you is, so over here at Yavapai College, we recently went from offering a 2-year RN to a BSN program, going to 4-year, and the nursing OpenStax have been amazing. Really, really great to have those resources. What are some possible other resources that are coming our way via OpenStax in the near future?
A great question. So as you know, we published the 8 titles in nursing this year. We just recently published Intro to Computer Science and Python programming. We're building out that suite, and now we're also beginning to look at how can we enrich. We have so many resources. How can we enrich those that are currently available in the market? So over the last year, we launched a program called Actionable, which takes those resources, embeds them within the LMS, and adds in group activities, video, simulation, etc., to make it a much more engaging learning experience for students. And I think the nice thing for faculty is if they're using, I don't know, do you use Canvas or Blackboard or, okay, that is all operable within that. So the students don't have to learn a new system. The faculty don't learn a new system. They're in the environment that they're familiar with. And so we plan to really scale that out in the coming year. And the initial enthusiasm for that is terrific. And we're really excited about it.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up. I think we're getting close to time. So we wanted to, close out with kind of a fun question or or inspiring. So looking ahead, what in general just gives you hope about education? There's so much change, so much turmoil going on right now. So what gives you hope?
Here's what gives me hope. The insatiable appetite to learn, both by practitioners and students. We must always tap into that because that is what drives innovation in the market. It always has, and it always will. And when it's sometimes dark, we forget that. But that's what keeps us going every single day. And that is still prevalent in the market. May not always seem it, but it is. That gives me enormous hope. The second thing that gives me enormous hope is that in today's advanced economy, education and knowledge is more important than ever. Now, how we do it is changing, but the need for it is only growing. And so we've got to make sure that we map our strategies to that growing need. But that gives me enormous hope. And the third thing that gives me enormous hope is the understanding now that we didn't have 10 years ago of the power of open. That we have free choice over what we use and how we use it in the classroom and what modality it is in. We didn't really have that 10 years ago. The market was controlled by about 3 players, but that's no longer the case. So that is really a force for positive change. So it's really those 3 things that I think we're going to see. I think in terms of resources, a golden age coming up. It's going to be different. It's going to require a lot of work, but it's going to be absolutely thrilling to watch.
Lovely. Oh, David, this was such a wonderful conversation. Carrie and Megan, such great questions. David, definitely such
I really
insightful thoughts.
enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. Like, I just really appreciate your thoughts, your insights, and your experience. And we look forward to more what's going to be coming, from OpenStax, from the world of open pedagogy, and maybe even some of the things that we talked about here today to see what develops and evolves as that goes. Thank you for your time. We know how valuable it is, and we really appreciate it. Thank you from the WIN Coalition, from Yavapai College, from our host today, and from, of course, me, our moderator. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right. We'll see everyone later. We'll check everyone out next time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the What's Next speaker series, brought to you by the Yavapai College WIN Coalition. We hope today's conversation has sparked new ideas and inspired you to think about the future of education in fresh and exciting ways. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to share it with your colleagues and community. Until next time, keep seeking signals, stay curious, and join us on the journey of discovering what's next.